So now that we have the utilitarian theory basically on the table, let's talk about some objections to utilitarianism and how the theory might answer them. And the first objection is the sort of counterexample, you might imagine someone like Socrates coming up with, right? And this is a counterexample that comes from a philosopher, Bernard Williams. And Williams says, well, imagine that you are a good utilitarian and you get out of school and you have a degree in chemistry or biology and you can't find a job. You have a wife or a husband and children and you need money, but you can't find a job. And one of your friends says to you, well, look, I have this great job. It pays a whole lot of money. It's developing chemical and biological weapons. And Williams imagines you responding, or whoever responding, how in the world would I, why would you think I'd do that? I think that chemical and biological weapons are terrible. And the guy responds, your friend is like, yeah, I do too. I think they're awful, but look, someone's going to get this job. In fact, the other guy they'll probably hire, he's really into chemical and biological weapons. He'll do a great job. What's more, he's single. He's just going to spend the money on himself. If you do it, you will spend the money on your wife and kids or your husband and kids. That in itself will create more happiness. But you know what else? I know that you really hate biological and chemical weapons. So you will do the bare minimum you need to do not to get fired. So it's a win-win, right? Look, someone's going to do the job. You will do it as incompetently as possible without getting fired. So less research on biological and chemical weapons. But more than that, you'll spend the money in a better way. That'll create the most happiness. Now, Williams thinks that this is absurd. He thinks that this is an obvious counterexample to utilitarianism. If it tells us that this is what we should do, he thinks that utilitarianism can't be right. Most of us think that we should not involve ourselves in something we regard as immoral just because it might have better consequences. If we think that chemical and biological weapons are wrong, our friend's story shouldn't convince us that, hey, we can go work on them. A more modern example might be, someone who thinks that global warming is the biggest problem facing us, is very worried about, what's going to happen. And a friend of hers says, well, look, I got you a job at Exxon. Wouldn't that be great? Look, somebody's going to do the job. If you get the job, you can donate all of this huge salary to charities that fight climate change. And what's more, you'll do the job as badly as possible, I know, so it's a win-win. If you really think climate change is a horrible threat to us, and you think that the oil companies are responsible for it, it definitely seems you should not go to work for one of them. That's what Williams will say. But I want you guys to notice in the article, in the Lewis Krauss article, the utilitarians bite the bullet here. Look, I said when you run into a counterexample, you can rework the theory to avoid it, you can discard your theory, or you can bite the bullet. And utilitarians take that third response and they bite the bullet. And they'll actually say, I think they've backed up a little bit from this, not because they don't believe it, but just because there's bad press. But for a long time, McCaskill, Mr. Effective Altruism, Mr. Future Guy, was actually recommending, well, if you have a good job in an oil company, somebody's going to do it. If you're a good effective altruist, if you're going to donate all this money to do all the good that we effective altruists want to do, go on and take that oil company job. He now says, I think that's so harmful, nobody should do it. But I don't think good utilitarian logic fits with that. And remember, the author said people told him he will lie to you if he thinks it leads to good consequences, which is also utilitarian. And I think he's probably fibbing here, right? Because good utilitarian logic would say, take that job. And the utilitarians will bite the bullet. And they'll go further with it, right? Think about the article. They'll say, look, if you want to do good, don't go off and become, a doctor or work for a charity. If you want to do good, get the highest paying job you can get, give that money to a charity. They will do the most good. Why is that? Well, they claim that these high earning jobs, someone's going to do them whether or not it's you. The same goes for the charity job. Person in the charity job will probably do it just as well as you will, or pretty close. But the person in the high earning job, if you can get one of these, nobody besides the effective altruist, the good utilitarian, will go into these high earning jobs and give away most of their money. So the utilitarian, the response of guys like McCaskill is just to really bite the bullet here. They'll say, yep, if you care about the consequences, what's the problem? You, Williams, think this is weird, but you know what? You just don't think it through. If you really think it through, you ought to take these jobs because you're right, the logic is what it is. Another objection to utilitarianism is that it's too demanding. And think of the people in this article. The article on effective altruism, taking a job you might not necessarily like to give away most of the money, that certainly seems incredibly demanding. Or think about Singer's article and what he says, right? He thinks that we should all give away pretty much all of our income to help people who are poorer than we are. And Singer will say, even an American who is quote unquote poor by American standards is rich by global standards, right? When you look at the average person in the world, even most people in America who are fairly poor will have more money than the average of the world. And Singer will say, look, you want to know what creates the best consequences? Think about costs and benefits. He has this example of a child drowning in shallow water, and he says, well, if you could save this kid, but you would have to wade into muddy water and it would ruin your nicest pair of pants, we all think you should do it, right? Pants are not worth a human life. But think about the ways you might spend your money. If you spend $50 buying new clothes, well, that will make you happy. But couldn't you send that money somewhere else where people are a lot poorer? And what would that $50 do there? And how much happiness would it create? And he thinks for pretty much anything you might spend the money on, be it new pants, be it going to the movies, be it a nice dinner, be it a bigger apartment, it's always or almost always going to create more happiness if you sent it elsewhere. Look, people in poorer countries die because they don't, or get horribly sick because they don't have clean water. Well, we can build wells. Or to take a simple case that utilitarians like, think about mosquito nets, right? People in the developing world, in poor countries, get malaria. Malaria is really painful. It actually kills some people. You spend $50 on some nice new pants or a meal or whatever. Well, that could buy a whole bunch of malaria nets. Each malaria net one person could put up, and it will almost entirely keep them from getting malaria. You want to spend your $50, whatever you might spend $50 on that would make you happy, right? Fill in your own example, right? Malaria nets range between $2 and $3. We'll just split the difference. Say they're $2.50. Your $50 could buy 20 malaria nets that 20 people could put over their sleeping areas and avoid malaria, right? However happy it might make you, fill in whatever you want to do with the money, it will create a lot more happiness if it's spent on malaria nets that keep people from getting sick, right? Same logic, with food, it's so cheap to provide food for people who are starving or people who don't have shelter in the poorest countries in the world. You can do that with your money. It's always going to create more happiness there than it will spending it on yourself. Or it will till you're almost to the point of being as poor as the people you're trying to help. Utilitarianism is a super demanding theory. Or think about, I'll just keep hammering this home. Think about donating a kidney. If you have 2 healthy kidneys, and I'm guessing most people listening do, utilitarians would say you should almost certainly donate one, right? You will undergo some risk if you donate a kidney, and the procedure will be painful, but the odds are it will make a huge difference in someone else's life. It will lengthen their life by a number of years. Plus, they won't have to be on dialysis. Dialysis is very uncomfortable, takes a lot of time out of people's day. The pain you will experience will be more than outweighed by the pain you spare another person by the pleasure you create for them. Well, all of that we should give away most of our money because it could do more good elsewhere, that we should donate a kidney to a complete stranger. A lot of people will just say, that looks really weird, utilitarians. Your moral theory asks too much of us. I don't know. It's a hard objection to know what to make of. One thing a utilitarian, they'll have a few responses to this. If someone says, look, nobody thinks you're morally required to give a kidney to a complete stranger. Nobody thinks that you are required to give away all of your income to help people you don't know. Well, the utilitarian will have a few responses. So I think the utilitarian will say a few things to this, right? The objection here is this. Look, you utilitarians say that we're morally required to do these things. Most of us wouldn't think that we are. We would think that you are saintly if you do it, but you haven't done anything wrong if you don't do it, right? There's what morality requires of people, what people are blameworthy for not doing, most of us would think, and there's what's morally required. You are certainly not blameworthy, most of us would think, if you don't give away all your income to help complete strangers, or if you don't give a kidney to a complete stranger. The utilitarian has a few responses, though. So one thing utilitarian will say, and this is the thing that Singer pushes, is that, look, even common sense morality will think that we're required to do a lot more than we think we are if we're consistent. Think about the child drowning in shallow water. Singer will say, look, if you let a kid drown in front of you and you told people about it, they wouldn't be like, well, okay, that's some not, okay. I mean, those are nice pants, right? Stinks for the kid. No, people would think you are a terrible person. They would blame you. They would think that you had an obligation to save this child. And Singer will say, a lot of the suffering in the world, it's out of sight, out of mind, so we're not consistent about it. But if we were, utilitarianism wouldn't look so weird we would see that we have a duty to save these people. Another thing that the utilitarian might say, and that they do say, is that, look, morality might just be more demanding than we thought. I mean, look, it's a kind of weird objection to say, oh, well, that can't be what morality asks of us. Isn't morality asking too much, right? I mean, there's one objection to this kind of thinking that this philosopher Susan Wolf has in this article, Moral Saints, that I'm not going to have you guys read because it's a really stupid article, even though it's assigned all the time. Wolf's objection is, well, this kind of moral claim can't be true because as an upper middle class person with upper middle class person hobbies, I would have to give up my upper middle class person hobbies if that were true, but obviously I should still be able to eat at French restaurants and do other fancy people things. And it's like, I don't know, Susan Wolf, it's a pretty stupid theory of morality that just is going to pat you on the back and say, keep on doing whatever you're doing, that's great, right? In another context, a friend of mine, his mom said, it's a weird, the minister is not doing a very good job in church if you go in there and you don't feel a little guilty. I would say a moral theory that never makes you feel guilty, that never tells you you're doing the wrong thing, probably not a great moral theory, right? So I'm not sure what to make of this, that the utilitarian is too demanding, because a good moral theory is sometimes going to be demanding. Now, I do think there's something to this, and I'll come back to it, but I'm not sure it's the knockout punch it's made out to be by some people. And I think a utilitarian could say that a lot of moral progress is just us seeing that morality requires more of us than we thought. And I think this is true. For a lot of human history, people only cared about their specific group. You will read intelligent Greeks or Romans who just think the fact that somebody is a Celt or whatever means that they don't matter. Think about, just a lot of stuff in history. The idea that other people should matter, even though they're distant and different, we might think that that's pretty clear. For a lot of human history, it wasn't. The fact that it's become clear is moral progress. And, there's another interesting example. When people first started giving blood, the idea that you should give blood to help others was by many people considered a bit weird. For a lot of human history, the very idea that you should do this would have seemed bizarre to people. Now most of us think, and I at least think, that you probably, if you can, should give blood, especially if, like me, you have type O blood that is, the universal donor. Feeling a little guilty saying this because I haven't given blood for a while. I really don't like giving blood, but I feel like I should. And the utilitarian will say, look, people used to think giving blood was weird, more moral progress. Down the road, people might think that giving a kidney is the same as giving blood. So I don't know what to make of this charge. I will come back to it, though. The more damaging charge for utilitarianism, and I'm going to keep coming back to this one in some form or other, is that utilitarianism does badly with fairness and respect for persons. Think of the Le Guin short story I had you read. In this city, this child is kept in horrible conditions because somehow the prosperity of the whole city depends on it. There's also a really good episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. If you like Star Trek, I quite like Star Trek, as will become apparent as we go through the course. That's based on this. And the idea is, well, this is horrible, even if it does make all the people in this city happy, even if they depend on the child's suffering, it is wrong to treat this child like this. It is not fair that they should suffer so much for the benefit of others. What's more, you just shouldn't use another person in this way. And the utilitarian response, I think, to a case like the one Le Guin presents, the Omelas case, will be, it's no mark against a theory that it gives us weird answers in weird cases. Look, you, Le Guin, have given us a sci-fi case where magic somehow, I don't know, you never sketch it out, but somehow, probably magic, this whole city's prosperity and happiness depends on a child suffering. Well, guess what? In the real world, there's not magic. Star Trek has a pretty ingenious way of setting up, how a child suffering might, do this. But again, it's Star Trek. That's not real. Weird cases give you weird answers. The utilitarian will say, in the real world, utilitarianism will almost never recommend horribly unfair things. We'll come back to this because I'm not sure almost never is good enough. But they'll say, look, most of us care about fairness. It's hard to imagine cases where doing this will really have these effects. Don't worry about it. A more common, less sci-fi example is imagine that, you, for whatever reason, you can't catch someone who committed a crime and the public is angry and there will be terrible consequences if someone isn't caught. Maybe you should frame a prisoner. And the utilitarian will say, well, A, this is still weird because you haven't filled in the awful consequences. B, yes, it would be unfair to frame somebody, but we wouldn't recommend it because it will probably come out. And if it does, that will have even worse consequences than not catching someone. So yeah, in theory, utilitarianism will do badly with fairness because they don't care about fairness as a value, but they will say in practice it doesn't work out as badly as you might think. They don't care about fairness in and of itself because all they care about is happiness, but they will say acting unfairly almost always has bad consequences, so our theory doesn't have the weird results you want to claim. All right, so I know that went on a bit long, but there's a lot to go over here, both the utilitarian, the objections to it, as well as their responses.